So I recently finished The Mandalorian Season 3, and I'm not happy. I don't think I've been so uninvested in a Star Wars project since The Rise of Skywalker. So I decided to tackle this particular season and find out what went so horribly wrong with the series. Now, look. The Mandalorian is not a great show. It's got some massive writing flaws, like Mando having literal plot armor, making conflicts tensionless, and has constant side quests that feel more like busy work. But I still enjoyed the series overall, because of some of the decent writing and action that gets cropped up every once in a while. For example, episode 3 of season 1 is one of the best episodes in this whole series, because it's able to establish Mando's internal conflict to either leave Grogu with the Empire or try and rescue him. Pedro Pascal as the Mandalorian was also a highlight of the first 2 seasons, due to his ability to convey emotions while keeping a mask on. Season 1 had a lot of those strengths to start with, and made for a flawed but entertaining watch. Season 2 is even more flawed, containing more of these side quests and giving us some really dumb moments, such as the part where the Dark Troopers get sent out into space when they can easily fly back to the ship. That season also had good moments, such as Din Djarin revealing his face to get information to save Grogu, even if it means being exiled and labeled an apostate by his own tribe. Or Bill Burr's character standing up to a corrupt officer who led a mission that let his own people die. Or the finale. Well, yes, it is massive fan service, gave Grogu a conclusion while leaving plot threads such as Mando's conflict with Bo-Katan to be handled in the next season. So how did that go? I found 3 major flaws with this season, which is the time wasting, the unsatisfying conclusions to conflicts, and the reversal of season 2. Let's start off with time wasting. As I've said before, The Mandalorian has these episodes where the majority of the time is spent on a side quest to get to the next part of the story. Oftentimes, it doesn't accomplish anything besides a big action sequence and a character we might come back to. It's one of the show's biggest flaws, but in season 3, it just feels excessive. Episodes 2, 4, and 6 contain some of the most boring, pointless, and overly long segments of the entire show. Let's go over each of these episodes. Episode 2 starts off on Tatooine, where Mando gets a droid named R5 to scout out Mandalore before he arrives there. Then Mando has to scout the area using the droid. The droid gets lost in a cave, and he slowly has to walk inside the cave. Then he gets into a brawl with some alien cavemen. Then he recovers the droid and figures out that the planet is breathable. Why wasn't this taken care of several minutes ago? He then explores the cave, which is fine because it gives Mandalore a sense of mystery. Too bad it's never used to its full potential, before some random spider droid captures him. Honestly, that droid is one of the best parts about this season, mostly because of its gritty design and reminds me a bit of General Grievous. Afterwards, Grogu then runs out of the cave and into the ship to fly back to Bo-Katan for help, despite the fact that he was able to put a Rancor to sleep in the Book of Boba Fett. Which is a very bad move, because Bo-Katan doesn't want Mando's help, which was set up in the first episode of the season, and that by the time Grogu flies all the way back to Bo-Katan, which could take hours at least, and that she's willing to help, and that they also have to get back to Mandalore, which takes another few hours before Mando dies. Gee, it's almost like the situation isn't even remotely believable. So Bo-Katan for some reason decides to help now, and they fly back to Mandalore, where we, and I'm not kidding, have a repeat of the same events just through Bo-Katan's perspective. Then she rescues him, and they both find the living waters to bathe. Mando goes in before he falls, and Bo-Katan has to rescue him again. She also sees a mythosaur. That's the episode. So what did we learn? That Mandalore is actually habitable and not poisoned, and we set up a Din Djarin and Bo-Katan partnership in the most rushed and clunky way possible. All this could have been done in 20 minutes, not 40. Most of this episode was just pointless filler that adds nothing to progress the story or characters. And once we get to episode 4, it's not much better. We start the episode with a training montage, as Mando has bathed in the waters and is now allowed back on the watch. Also, Bo-Katan is welcome because she also bathes and hasn't removed her helmet for some reason. Grogu gets into a paint gun showdown with this kid, where the rules are confusing since this kid hits Grogu one at a time, but when it's Grogu's turn, he triple bursts the kid and ends up winning. Why didn't this kid just do that to Grogu? By the way, there's no setup for some future episode, it's just, hey, here's a scene with Grogu in it. It's getting old at this point. Anyways, the kid that lost gets captured by an Elder Scrolls dragon, and the whole episode revolves around rescuing this kid. Then for some reason, the show decides to cut away from that plot and onto Grogu's flashback. This scene is pointless. All it does is show action and a cameo from Jar Jar himself. Side note, I'm actually glad the actor is finding other work in Star Wars outside of Jar Jar. The dude deserves it. And unlike Season 1's flashbacks, we don't come back to this at any point, so it's basically unfinished since it doesn't establish how Grogu got to that encamped area back in Season 1. Now, I could give this the benefit of the doubt that we could come back to this in Season 4, but I have to judge what we have. And what we have was an incomplete story that feels pointless to tell since we all know where this leads to. Not to mention we don't learn anything new from Grogu. So after that sequence ends, we cut back to Mando and his crew as they try to rescue this child. Then all of a sudden, Paz Vizsla, this guy, suddenly starts freaking out and blurts that the kid is his son. Why wasn't this established once the kid got taken? Why did he start freaking out then? Why did he agree to sleep until morning instead of arguing against it when it means his son is going to be eaten alive? What is even happening? So anyways, they rescue the kid, and once they get back, Bo-Katan says to the armorer that she saw on Mythosaur. All this episode sets up is an eventual agreement with Paz Vizsla to help out Greef Karga in the next episode, since they saved his son, and a continuing conversation with Bo-Katan and the armorer. In 31 minutes, there are only 2 things that are relevant. Again, this could have taken at least 15 minutes. And you know what sucks? Like with episode 2, the way they go about befriending Paz is clunky, slow, and was set up very poorly. He doesn't have a character to begin with outside of serving the armorer. And unlike Season 1, there's no short brawl they get into or an argument once Mando is redeemed. It's a non-existent conflict. Then there's episode 6. Everyone's talked to death about this episode, so I'm not going to go too much into detail, but about 80% of this episode is filler that means absolutely nothing, and contains one of the worst side quests of this series. Mando doesn't grow or learn from his experience dealing with his hatred of droids, which is somehow back, despite him warming up to IG-11 in Season 1, and this scene in Season 2.
Sorry, gang! Come on! You know he doesn't like droids!
May as well let them have at it. The crest needs a good once-over.
Oh, so he likes droids now.
The way the malfunctioned droid gets discovered is unintentionally hilarious. The eventual reveal that Christopher Lloyd's character is rigging the droids on purpose because he's a separatist could have been interesting if they didn't make him into a complete joke by the end. And we get yet another pointless Grogu sequence because we need to keep milking him, where he gets knighted for helping Lizzo's character win a game. The only part that matters is the final few minutes where Bo-Katan confronts her past crew and she gets the Darksaber. More on that later. The point here is that these episodes barely accomplish anything significant, and if there is anything significant, it's so dull and gives you nothing satisfying. Even the best episode in this season, which is episode 3, mostly because it feels like a writer for Andor got lost in a set for this show and came with his own short story, the biggest takeaway was that a member of Moff Gideon's is back and has infiltrated the New Republic. That's it. And unless this leads to development for Pershing later on, you could have skipped to episode 5 and you would have gotten the exact same idea. Speaking of episode 5, let's talk about unsatisfying conclusions to problems. I've already mentioned how Mando and Bo-Katan joining forces and Paz's arc of eventually helping out Mando was rushed, but that's nothing compared to what happens in episode 5. There's a new minor villain introduced in this series named Gorian Shard. When I first heard of this guy in episode 1, I knew he was going to be a recurring villain that would come back. What I didn't expect was for him to appear in this episode, then disappear for 3 episodes before coming back in episode 5, where he's defeated and dies. His sole purpose was for episode 5, where he bombs Navarro, and Carson Teva has to recruit the Mandalorians for help, since the New Republic is being occupied. The Battle of Navarro is one of the worst battles in this entire series. Everyone just stands and shoots. There's little to no tactics involved. The Mandalorians decimate everyone because they have little plot armor. Gorian Shard focusing only on Mando and Bo-Katan was a stupid move that cost him the whole battle, since all he had to do to the Mandalorians of the city was just bomb the place again. The one moment of tension where the pirates get a machine gun and start knocking back the Mandalorians is solved almost immediately by having the armor teleport from behind them and knocking them out one by one. Brilliant. And the main ship's armor is so weak that when Gorian Shard finally decides to bomb Navarro again, Mando and Bo-Katan just cut through the ship like butter. The ship crashes and Gorian dies. Man, what a great battle. I'm sure Gorian made for a great villain. But wait, it gets better. Another tension breaker was how Bo-Katan was introduced to the Children of the Watch. Maybe Bo-Katan could realize how restrictive the Watch are and try to be a voice of reason for Mando to leave. Maybe Bo-Katan could teach the rest of the Mandalorian tribe that there's more than one way to live the way, since she is a Mandalorian herself. Or we could just have a random convenience that Bo-Katan sees a mythosaur, tells the armorer that, and she automatically believes her in the next episode, and have the armorer claim that now that Bo-Katan has seen the mythosaur, that she now walks both worlds and can remove her helmet now. Guess which one the writers chose. I seem to remember that the armorer was the leader of a very restrictive cult, and that if you broke a rule, you were exiled. But apparently, that now changes because someone claims she saw a mythosaur. Whether or not the claim was true doesn't matter. The fact that a restrictive cult leader is this gullible to believe that Bo saw a mythosaur with no evidence, meanwhile Mando had to bring evidence to prove he bathed in the living waters, it's inconsistent and shows how this script feels like a first draft. But that's not the worst example, because no, that's in episode 6 for how they handled the conflict between Bo-Katan and Mando on who gets the Darksaber. Basically, there is none. This conflict was set up in the finale of Season 2, where Mando gets the Darksaber after defeating Moff Gideon, despite the fact that last time I checked you needed to kill someone in order to get the Darksaber, but whatever. The dilemma was Bo-Katan would need to win against Mando to get the Darksaber, a dilemma that Moff Gideon most likely planned. She couldn't receive it as a gift because she would be considered a pretender. So how does this conflict get resolved in Season 3? Simple, by having yet another coincidence that since the spider droid defeated Mando, then Bo-Katan defeated the spider droid, that for some reason is grounds for her getting back the Darksaber since Mando had it previously, having Mando tell this to the other Mandalorian clan, and they just automatically believe it, no questions asked. As if the Darksaber rules were already confusing enough to begin with. This easily takes the cake as one of the worst ways to resolve a conflict. The conflict in Season 2 meant nothing, as it just hand-waved away in the most apathetic way possible. Which leads me to my final point about how this season tanked so heavily. This season completely neuters, and in some cases, rewinds Season 2's conclusion. It was already bad enough when the Book of Boba Fett had Grogu go back to Mando, which undid the Season 2 finale, when Mando had to say goodbye to Grogu. So what does Grogu contribute to the season? He's really cute. Yeah, that's it. His one flashback is unfinished, and we learn nothing new about him, and he doesn't add anything significant to the plot. There's no new revelations with him, no new abilities, he's just there because this. Moff Gideon comes back because apparently he didn't make it to trial, so the whole plot of defeating Moff Gideon in Season 2 has been reset. Speaking of which, he now has Dark Trooper armor on, and his plan was to make clones of himself by using Grogu's DNA to have his clone use...
The Force. I was isolating the potential to wield the Force and incorporating it into an unstoppable army.
Remember when the Force was just a thing that was connected around us in the originals? Before Mediocres that became a thing in the prequels, because that's what we needed. Now you can just copy Jedi DNA, transfer it to clones of yourself, and you can create a super powerful Force user. Just wonderful. Anyways, the finale is a battle between the Mandalorian tribes and Moff Gideon's Beskar stormtroopers that have Beskar on, but are still complete cannon fodder. And Moff Gideon dies again by screaming while being engulfed in an explosion. So let me get this straight. In Season 1, you introduce Moff Gideon as this imposing figure, yet he loses. In Season 1, he's brought back in Season 2, he loses again. He's brought back again, he is established towards the finale of this series again, and then loses. Again! I'm sorry, I don't care how much Giancarlo Esposito you throw at the screen. Gideon is reduced to a joke, a complete cartoon villain. Why am I even going on this tangent? It's simple. These problems happen because they reset the clock, having him escape off-screen only for him to appear in the last 2 episodes before dying in the most hilarious way possible. If they couldn't bring him back to the narrative in a way that works, then they should have just let him go. Have Gideon have the last laugh as he sets up the conflict with Bo-Katan and Mando, and have someone else be the villain. Because not only does this neuter the entire conflict as the Darksaber is just given back to Bo-Katan, it also neuters Moff Gideon's menace as he just comes back again only to lose, so he accomplished nothing. But the character who gets the worst treatment is Din Djarin, aka Mando. Any sort of development he had, whether it be the first 2 seasons or setups in the Book of Boba Fett, were reduced to atoms. His hatred of droids is back for some reason, despite in Season 1 he learns to like IG-11. I get it, maybe he doesn't like any other droid except for IG-11, but the least you could do is let him be at least distant towards droids but still willing to help, showing that he's still trying to improve but he's not quite there, not go back to square one, threatening him like he does in episode 6. His previous training with the Darksaber back in the Book of Boba Fett meant nothing because he just gives up the Darksaber to Bo-Katan in the most anticlimactic way possible. You think they may have explored the concept of Mando moving away from his cult and realizing how he's been manipulated, given that he took his helmet off to save Grogu, how restricted the Watch are, and the fact that he knows that the Mandalorians like Bo-Katan exists. Instead, he's back in the Watch again with nothing to challenge his existing beliefs this time. I'm sorry, no, the way the cult operates makes it very clear that the Armorer is an oppressive leader who demands that her followers follow every rule to a T, and if you don't, you're exiled and labeled an apostate. I don't think these are the people that Mando should look up to. In short, Mando's character is just a blank slate. He learns nothing new for him to grow as a character, the problems are just hand-waved away when it's time to move on. He's just a background character in his own show. Because let's be honest here, the majority of the focus is on Bo-Katan this season. Now, I haven't watched Rebels, and I haven't gotten to her character in the Clone Wars, but from this season, she's not giving me good first impressions. Bo-Katan is literally treated as a chosen one in this season. What's worse is that it adds nothing unique to flip the trope. Bo-Katan is immediately welcomed into the Watch, since she conveniently had her helmet on the entire time and jumped into the waters to save Mando from drowning. As mentioned before, she claims she saw a mythosaur and the Armorer just believes her during the next episode, so now she could take her helmet off and the Armorer, for whatever reason, says that Bo-Katan now walks both worlds and that it's her mission to reunite the other Mandalorians. We learn nothing about why she wants to rule Mandalore, so I don't really care about her goal, and her one major arc is that she surrendered to Moff Gideon at one point, and it led to her entire faction getting killed. So after meeting him again, she decides not to. This is in the span of 1 episode, and my goodness, it feels so unearned. Because they dropped this last minute, so there's no conflict once she meets Moff Gideon again, because we'll know what will happen. And no, the existence of Clone Wars and Rebels does not make this season any better. If you have to understand Bo-Katan's motivations and struggle in this season through 2 separate shows, that is a terrible way to write exposition. Overall, this season just feels so depressing. I'm not expecting every single Star Wars show to be on the level of Andor. It would be nice, but sometimes having an extremely flawed but entertaining show with a few scenes of decent writing is good enough for me. And that's what The Mandalorian used to be. Now it's just become a sad former shell of itself, a mediocre mess that's trying way too hard to do too many things at once, which is why a lot of the plot points, storylines, and character growths feel so rushed. To put it simply, This season wasn't good. The only two series that's keeping me interested in Star Wars right now are Andor and Visions. That's not good enough. I hope Favreau and Filoni, if they even make a season 4, learn from these massive flaws in this season and try to regroup to make something much better. And I hope that Disney realizes that, especially since Andor exists, they can't keep pumping out shows like this. Because if they keep going like this, they might lose more support from fans than they already have. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing. It really helps. I know I was negative in this review. Don't worry, I've got some positive stuff coming out next. What are your thoughts on The Mandalorian Season 3? Did you like it, hate it, or just flat out indifferent towards it? If I got something wrong in this video, please let me know in the comments and I will try to correct myself moving forward. But until then, thanks for watching, and I will see you all soon.